Riots emanating from a cross-community youth feud have been condemned as wholly destructive and pointless, following 2 nights of July trouble in South Belfast, as teenagers and children young as 7 were seen throwing bricks, bottles, and petrol bombs at police, in some of the worst disorder the area had seen in a decade. And while South Belfast is not the first place you think of when it comes to interface violence, the 2 groups at the center of this dispute have been at it for generations. The Village and St. James are 2 historically loyalist and Republican heartlands, located on opposite sides of the M1 motorway, dividing South and West Belfast. Just off the Donegal Road, the Village is a low-income, historically Protestant area of the city's south. During the Troubles, the UDA and UVF would have both had a presence in the Village, but in recent times it has been more often associated with the UVF. St. James, on the other hand, is a low-income, Catholic neighborhood just off the Falls Road in West Belfast, and during the Troubles would have been home to handfuls of IRA volunteers. And though peacetime brought with it IRA decommissioning, St. James has seen its fair share of violence in recent years, with the dissident Republican murders of drug kingpin Warren Crossan in 2020 and his enforcer Mark Hall in 2021, both taking place on the streets of St. James. But while the UVF and IRA are no longer at war, the attitudes they harvested have had a lasting effect on young people in both areas, with generations and generations of young men from the Village and St. James seeing interface violence as a rite of passage. And while the M1 motorway that separates the communities is a much larger gap than most interface areas in the city, it is certainly a divide that both the hoods of St. James and the Village have been willing to cross for many years. From late 2023 and into 24, there have been ongoing, sporadic, tit-for-tat attacks between a group from the Village and a group from St. James, with the St. James hoods attacking homes and cars parked on the Village's Glenmackin Street, and the Village hoods targeting the St. James community farm. But while the dispute was between youths, it was having larger consequences, with residents of Glenmackin Street losing sleep over the late-night attacks, and the St. James community farm needing to close early just to keep their animals safe. And unlike the hoods from St. James, the ones coming over from the Village were supported by the UVF, with the Village's 12th of July bonfire built in plain view of St. James, and UVF flags erected near the Broadway roundabout. So coming into July 2024, tensions between the Village and St. James were suddenly higher than they'd been in years. And sitting in the middle of it were the police, who, in the eyes of some, had not gone far enough in taking action against the offenders, with some rumored to be early teens and younger. Around 5 p.m. on Monday, July 15th, police officers responded to further reports of running attacks between the Village and St. James near the Broadway roundabout. But upon arrival, uniformed officers were attacked by around 50 youths inside the Village, who pelted them with masonry and paint bombs for several hours, taking the uniformed officers by surprise, as most of them did not have their shields and were forced to remain in their vehicles for the duration of the attacks. However, the PSNI only took some of the damage, with the windscreens of other vehicles in the area shattered by bricks. Armed police Land Rovers would eventually arrive, as the PSNI once again came under attack from bricks, bottles, and a total of 30 petrol and paint bombs. Only after a police drone came down to change batteries did crowds begin to disperse, and an uneasy calm was restored to the area around 1 a.m.
There have been pictures and scenes of adults handing children bricks, and that's just not on. That we need to call this out. This is child criminal exploitation. This is exploitation of children. This is a safeguarding issue. This is child abuse.
So coming into Tuesday, July 16th, the police had their focus on the Village, with uniformed police on the ground from 2 p.m. chatting to locals. However, around 7:30 p.m., those officers came under attack when masked youths began throwing bottles and chased them away. In return, armored vehicles moved in, and for the next 45 minutes sustained a barrage of bricks, bottles, and paint. The rioters then lit a fire in the middle of the road, while armored vehicles again advanced. Over the next hour, stones, bottles, fireworks, and petrol bombs were thrown at police vehicles from the Broadway area of the village. And it was during this time that a man who looked to be in his 30s was spotted passing bricks to rioters as young as 7, taunting police, and even exposing himself for the world to see. After retreating back into the village for about an hour, the Hoods would eventually return to Glenmachan and begin attacking police once again. However, the armored Land Rovers quickly ran formations and forced the rioters back into the village for good, as violence slowly quieted down and calm was restored to the area around 2 a.m. On Wednesday the 17th, the violence in the village was turned off just as quickly as it was turned on, in a very similar fashion to the UVF-sanctioned riots on West Belfast's Lanark Way in 2021. But additionally, a significant arrest had been made, and on Thursday the 18th, 38-year-old James Thompson was charged with rioting, possessing an offensive weapon in a public place, and indecent behavior. Thompson, from Newton Abbey, which is just north of Belfast, was said to have been identified by his brand of Nike Air Max shoes. And while he did not enter a plea during his initial hearing, Thompson claimed he was only in the area to help calm the unrest. On August 7th, a 15-year-old boy was charged with 2 counts of rioting on Tuesday, July 16th. And on August 12th, an 11-year-old was also charged with rioting and causing an explosion likely to endanger life on Monday, July 15th. While the youths were the ones throwing the bricks, none of this would happen in an area like the village without the blessing of the UVF. So while from the outside looking in, it's very easy to condemn the parents of the rioters, and in some cases that condemnation is well deserved. But it's not as simple as that in a place like the village, a tightly packed area with families who have called it home for generations. But more importantly, still a place where going against the UVF will likely come with serious consequences. So while good parenting is an important part of the discussion, the realities of living in the village should also be considered. But on the other side of the law, young offenders can create an equally morally challenging scenario for the police, with a single rioting conviction having life-changing consequences for any young person, with restrictions on travel and employment immediately becoming an uphill battle. The perfect scenario for joining a group like the UVF. And just to be clear, the majority of residents in areas like the village in St. James are just trying to get by and want zero to do with violence like this. But unfortunately, a violent minority will always speak louder, and the rivalry between the hoods of the village and St. James runs deep and is very much here to stay. But hopefully, things will remain quiet for a while, as police continue to monitor the Broadway roundabout day and night, watching and waiting for the next young man seeking the other side.